Okay, we've talked some about corn in the feed ID section, and then we've talked about it, and we gave you that corn dissection last week in class. We're going to give you a little bit more of the science and theory about some things here related to corn. So we're going to start with the corn grain dissection. So we did kind of a cross section. Then these pictures, it would be left to right when we're looking at these. Going through there, and we have a, where the hell's my highlighter? We have a flinty hybrid or vitreous hybrid and a flowery hybrid. So no endorsement for the names here, but we talked about the flowery endosperm is the white powdery stuff, and then the vitreous or flinty endosperm is the glassy yellow tinted kind of crystals. They're both starch, but the vitreous is much more aggressively packed, more tightly packed than the flowery. There's a lot more air pockets and surface area in this area as opposed to the flinty area. So this is a hybrid over here on the left that is very much a flinty seed, whereas over here on the right we have one that's dominated by the flowering endosperm. So this is probably much more available in the rumen and the large intestines of our cow, and it's favored over the flinty or less available, and we'll talk some about how that all happens going through. So we dissected down here the circle. This is how we dissected your corn to see the different stages. As we get more and more mature, the seed gets more and more flinty, depending on how much is meant to be in that particular seed, what the genetics are. And the center stays a little flowery. The outside edges tend to be a little bit more flinty. So when we're looking at the anatomy of a seed, corn seed, you've got the bran on the outside, you got the germ or kind of future plant down here, and it's surrounded by the reserves of energy, which are the endosperm. You've got the tightly packed starch, the flinty or vitreous, and then the looser packed starch, the flowery endosperm. These are reserves that the seed provides to get the next plant started. Another representation of the same sort of thing, again, all the parts associated with the seed. So the outer coating is the bran. There's that dent at the top as the seed dries down. You've got the different types of endosperm in the center. You've got the flowery represented in the white. You got the vitreous represented in the yellow. The germ in the middle is where our embryo is for the plant that's moving forward. So if we compare them, the flinty or vitreous to the flowery, we can see that they have different, those starches have different characteristics in the digestive tract of an animal, in the silo, and how they handle generally. So rate of fermentation, the vitreous in the rumen is a lot slower than the flowery. The flowery is faster. Ruminal availability, because it's slower, the flinty or vitreous has a lower availability. If it's faster, it stays in the rumen just as long. Faster, more of it will disappear, more of it will be consumed or used by the rumen bacteria. When we talk about whole tract, total tract digestibility, nose to anus, we'd expect possibly that the vitreous has a lower. It really depends on what the small intestine and those enzymes can do. Versus the flour, you'd expect it to be higher, more completely digested and fermented as it moves through the ruminant digestive tract. We know that the longer starch kernels the corn sits in the silos, the more available it becomes. As it soaks in the lactic acid that's generated, it becomes softer, opens up, surface area increases. So the vitreous is going to take longer to become available. The flour is going to be more available more quickly. Handles, we talked about the difference in handling characteristics. The vitreous tends not to break. We get docked for cracks when we sell corn, so it handles better, and that's why vitreous corn has been bred for. But we haven't until recently thought about, if this corn is never leaving the farm, it's going into silage, it's going into cows, maybe the vitreous or flinty endosperm is not the direction we want to go. But it does not handle well. It breaks apart, turns to dust. All of those are negative when handling corn, shipping it across the world. So backing up a bit, talking about processing corn. We showed you in the feed ID section that we've got corn. It can either be fed whole, it could be rolled or cracked. So that's about the same. You're breaking that corn into like 4 to 8 pieces. Meal, we're grinding it up to a powder. Steam flaked, we're basically putting it through a process similar to making popcorn. So if we look from top, the whole, down to steam flaked, we go more and more available as we go down toward the bottom, especially in the rumen. The whole may not be available at all in the rumen unless it gets chewed and broken up. The steam flaked is very available in the rumen. It's something we do to add to extra digestibility. We need some extra calories in the winter. Otherwise, it's probably not financially useful. If we look at a bar chart kind of representation of what the components or parts of a mature corn grain is, these are not necessarily in their locations, but we're doing relative percent. So water, 13%, crude protein, 8%, starch, 62%, fiber as NDF, 8%, fat, 7%, ash, 2%. We look at this as close to 2/3 of the corn kernel is starch. So if we remove that starch for whatever purpose, we'd expect what's left to be increased in the remaining portions of each of these. So more water, more protein, more fiber, more fat, more ash on a percentage basis. So when we're removing that starch, we think about corn byproducts, and we talked about the distiller's grains, the corn gluten feed, corn gluten meal, and we're going to show you where they come from or how they are manifest. So here's a schematic showing the wet processing or wet milling of corn. The idea is that we go through this sequence of steps and we want to remove the starch for human purposes or human consumption. So you're going to start out, and each step along the way, something comes out. So if we look here, we've got certain fermented condensed things. We can take out the germ. The corn oil goes in one direction. The corn gluten meal or germ meal goes in this direction. As we work our way through, we're going to pull off the bran. That outer coating, that's going to become our corn gluten feed. If we go through here and we separate out the protein, we're going to pull that off as corn gluten meal. So all these can be fed back to a cow in one way or another. We talked about the meal being high in protein, the corn gluten feed high in fiber, but they both have readily available energy. Different illustration of the same thing. Again, over on the left here, we have the steps that we go through to extract the starch that's going to help make our sodas and sugars and all the things in our life that we find so dear. Again, we have the different steps that we lose certain parts. The germ comes off, we pull out the oil. So 100 pounds of corn go in. We're going to get 16 pounds of oil out. We're going to probably get a significant amount of corn gluten feed and corn gluten meal. This stuff is shipped by the rail car full from the Iowa, Indiana, Illinois area to West Texas or the Texas Panhandle and other places to make cow feed. So these byproducts become the basis for cow feed, particularly in feedlots and things like that. Another approach is we can take a dry milling process. We can take the corn, we grind it so the starch comes out, and then we've got the corn bran, the germ, the parts of starch that don't come out are going to be hominy. So the starch comes out for whatever reason we want it to as humans to extract it. What's left over becomes reasonable animal feed. So hominy, high in NSC, high in fat, relatively speaking, high in energy over here. We're looking at the megacalories per pound on a dry matter basis. Where's our protein? Protein 10%, so it's about the same as we started. We're getting rid of the starch. We're keeping the oil. We're keeping the bran, so it's going to go up in nutrient density, particularly the energy process. So again, we're taking byproducts of the human food chain and feeding it to cows in an effort to take trash and having our ruminants turn it into something we like ice cream. Another process where we can get byproducts at the end that are useful to feed our cows. We start with whole corn, and our whole ultimate goal is to create ethanol. So where does that come out here? Somewhere down in here, ethanol gets extracted over here, 200 proof ethanol. So we go through, we slurry it up, we inoculate it, we liquefy it, and we run it through a fermentation. So we got to make sure that we don't have a lot of oxygen in there. And we want to pull out the starch from the corn kernels. So we slurry it, we chop it up, hammer mill over here. The yeast get a hold of that. They turn that starch into ethanol. What's left over, the grains, the dried distillers grains, DDGS over here, final product, becomes something we feed our cows that's enriched in protein, enriched in ash, enriched in fiber, enriched in phosphorus. So this becomes an animal feed. So in our feed ID, we had all those options there. If you're interested, a lot of the things we have on the feed ID will appear on this link here. You can click on that and work through looking at some of the things that are on our feed ID list and what their description is. Typical analysis. So this is meant to be a place where feed manufacturers can go and learn what the ingredients are about, and I think also find brokers for said ingredients. So this is from the North Dakota State um, University. So this talks about corn gluten feed. You got the byproduct of wet milling that comes off, high in protein. Um, and this is that diagram here with 4 showing where things come from. So kind of switching gears, talking something about corn. So if we get our corn planted late and then we got an early frost, we may have immature corn coming through our feeding system. So we know that immature corn is higher in moisture, so decreased plant dry matter. That can be a challenge to getting the right length of chop, making sure we have something that we can pack very quickly. We've got poor ear development. We don't have as much starch there as we could. Things are not packed the way they would, although it should be very floury if it's chopped up in the early stages of development, so it might be actually more available. If we look at stuff that's overly mature, like some of the stuff out here up on the hillside by my house, if you were going to chop that for corn, that would be very difficult to do. The whole plant dry matter goes up. It's not going to ferment the way it should, and because it's not as firm as it might be with all the water in it, it's not going to chop consistently and evenly the way it might if it was more at the proper moisture. Um, Digestibility challenges. You're going to have hard kernels if you leave things too mature. So you're going to get less starch available to the cow in the digestive tract. You're also going to have an increase in fiber digestibility. A lot of this has to do with leaf drop. The more leaf you drop, the remaining stalk is very undigestible. So you're going to have an overly mature corn plant past its prime. You're going to have issues with the fiber digestibility of that plant. So here's a couple slides about how corn grows. You've probably seen your corn plants in your dorms. They're probably too big for your cups by now. But we have emergence coming out, and then we have the stages are pretty much determined by the leaves coming out. So we 1, 2, 3. You can have up to maybe 12 leaves coming out, depending on where we are and what the genetics are. After that last leaf comes out, we have the tassel come out. And then as the corn kernel, ear of corn, um, establishes itself, we first have the silking, then we get the blistering of the corn as it starts to develop, the milky starch to get it started, and then we lose dry matter. We become more vitreous or flinty. We get to that dense stage, and finally the corn is mature. So another representation of the same thing. This is talking about water use. So if you're going to irrigate your corn, this is how you might determine how much needs to go there off this base. How much does a plant use? How many inches of water do you have to put on the field to satisfy the moisture requirements for various stages? And then we've got the stages in a more visual representation. So we're going all the way through here. We've got 18 leaves on this particular plant. You've got your tassel and then your reproductive stages going through, and what happens through each stage. So we have root development through tassel. We establish our kernels as things silk up. So that's maximum kernel number. Maximum number of rows in our ears, and then kernel weight is established by how much photosynthesis we have when those ears are filling out and if we got the right amount of water. So I hope that teaches you a little bit about more about corn. This should help you with your feed ID and understanding the flinty versus vitreous discussion, and hopefully give you an opportunity to check your plant for the number of leaves and what stage it gets to before it outgrows its cup.